Hi guys, and welcome to this evening's question time. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, how's the questions going to work? Well, basically, you'll notice I'm not wearing any glasses, and those that follow the channel will know I'm blind as a bat. So, my good lady has volunteered to come in and read the comments and read the questions out. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions that have been gathered from the community page, and then I'm going to answer them. And as questions come up on the live chat, Jane, my wife, will read them out. I did offer for her to be on the camera, but she wasn't having any of it. I said, all you've got to do is put some clothes on and you can be in the video, but she was having none of it. So that's that. So, Jane, can you give me the first question and we'll get on with it?
Yep, it's Mike L, and he says, what do you see as the biggest advancement in fly fishing technology over the last 20 years? And also, is there anything that's been not so good?
That's a great question, Mike, and I think probably one of the the things that struck me anyway about fly fishing and the advancement is the advent of social media. I think the likes of Facebook and that, the information, YouTube, Facebook, it's all out there, and it's much easier for people to take up the hobby, and I think that's been a fantastic thing. As regards to, I think you're maybe meaning tackle and stuff. There's always going to be advancements. I mean, tackle manufacturers have got to show some kind of progression in order to sell stuff, and that's the way it'll always be. But certainly, from my perspective, social media, YouTube and Facebook have been a massive help towards getting people more into this sport. I hope that answers your question, Mike.
Next one's from Adam Squires. Since getting back into fly fishing last year, I've fished mainly still waters but struggle to catch on dries. I think it's down to my leader tippet setup. What is the ideal leader and tippet setup for dries on small still waters? And what other tips could you share for fishing dries in this situation?
Hi Adam, it's a massive question really, and you've missed out a lot of factors. Weather conditions. Are the fish rising? If you're fishing dries when there's no fish rising, it's very unlikely that you're going to catch fish. You've got to look for the signs of hatch happening in the small still water. Things that you can do to help yourself is, I always find that reducing the size of the fly, reducing the diameter of the tippet is always a great starting point. Other ways of doing it is making sure you've degreased your leader thoroughly, so it's just going subsurface and not spooking fish. And when the going gets really tough, get as small as you can, and that'll often induce a take. I hope that answers your question. Guys, if you've got any questions live, please just type them out and I'll do my best to answer them. Well, Jane will read them out because I can't see anything at the moment.
Right, next one is from Simon Lehane. Should well-known anglers say on their posts or vlogs it's an advert if they are paid or given products to promote?
Thanks for that, Simon. That's a tricky one given the position I'm in. I'm supported by Witchwood. I'm also supported by Hanak, and Troutline.ro support me. So I'm very open about that. I've got no qualms about it. And I don't know about other anglers. I'm not in the industry in any way, shape or form. I'm just a mad for it angler like the rest of you. So I'm just giving you my opinion of products. And what I would say is it's an honest opinion. And whether other YouTubers or Facebookers or Instagram influencers, if you want to call them that, are given an honest opinion, I don't see a problem. Should they own up from the get-go that they're associated with those firms? Possibly, but I've got to say, if I'm buying something, regardless of it being fishing tackle, cameras, a car, I'll look at lots of different reviews, but then I'll make my own mind up, and I kind of take it everyone's the same. So thanks for putting me on the spot, Simon. I hope that's answered your question.
Lindsay, on your recent Fly Culture podcast, you talked about your mate catching grayling. Would you be able to go into more detail about the nymphing method talked about? That's from Kevin Tipper.
Kevin, I'm more than happy to do so. So on the recent podcast, I talked about a couple of my friends that got me into river fishing, Graham Lumsden. For those that haven't listened to the podcast, it's well worth a listen, by the way. We were in Slovenia, and Graham was showing me this technique with time strike with nymphs, and what it was he correctly assumed that if you put your nymphs into a pocket, that the fish have got a small window of opportunity to take them nymphs, and you can time that. So instead of looking for an indication on a French leader or any other form of indicator, you could just pitch your nymphs into the pocket water, count between 1 and 3 seconds, and then strike. And that's all it is. Basically, it took me a long time to get my head around it, actually, because I just couldn't get the timing right. But once you've got it and you've had a few fish doing that, then you always find when you're in pocket water, it's worth a go. I mean, I fished with Terry Bromwell, a couple of years ago now with lockdown. I've lost track of the years. But Terry was a master, and he called it picking the pockets. And what he would do is he would pitch his nymphs in, 1, 2, and invariably he would have a fish. He's a phenomenal angler, Terry, and it's a pleasure to fish with him. I must get out with him again soon. I hope that's clarified the technique, if you like.
And here's another question to put you on the spot. I think my personal favourite question. Chris White asks, how do top fishing competition participants balance their time between family and fishing? He's not sure he could maintain the balance without it being unfair on his wife.
Well, Chris, thanks for that. Jesus, there's some beauties tonight, aren't there? I'm very lucky. I no longer compete at any kind of real level. I play about at some of the river comps. I can't recall the last time I fished in a competition in a boat. Probably the Kit Kat Cup with Jock Kettles, but it's been a while. But when I was doing a lot of fishing, and if you're competing at that level, I would say you're putting in what I call the hard miles. You can learn as much as you like from Facebook and YouTube, and they're great learning resources, but unless you spend time on the water, you will never get to that level, international, European worlds. It's just not going to happen because you need to put in the hard miles. So, and I know what you're saying. I mean, when I was starting to break into the England team, I just had I had a baby, I had another baby on the way, and it was very difficult, and you've got to have a very understanding wife, and you've got to have deep pockets for flowers and chocolates, is what I would suggest. But it's a tough call. It really does depend on how much you want it. For me, the balance in the end became too much, and the family comes first. That's the bottom line. Nobody I know has ever become a millionaire out of being a fishing star. Take Howard Croston for example. He's still got to go to Harvey every day of the week and earn a crust, and he's been the world champion. So regardless of how successful you are, you've still got to have a job. And I think when it's all said and done, and I'm no longer able to do as much fishing as I currently enjoy, I'll still have my wife and family to come home to. So make sure you get that balance right. Thanks for the question. Not.
So we'll move to some questions from YouTube. TopCat77 asks, what are the top flies for Menteith in October?
You need to ask Jock Kettles that. He'll tell you all about Menteith, as long as there's not a competition on. And then you'll get absolutely nothing out of Kettles. He's murder. October, I would say, if you're going for pleasure fishing, Top Cat, what I would say is get the big stuff on. Get the big shuggies, humongous, whatever you want to call it. Snake flies, they always go well at the back end because the fish will be looking to bulk up for the coming winter, and the big flies will really work. If you're in a competition, then I would never overlook dries on Menteith. Even at that time of year, the fish are always looking up, and you could do yourself a real service. failing that, a washing line fished high up in the water would do quite well, I would think. I hope that answers your question.
Next one is Shay McKeever. He says, love your stuff, Lindsay, and appreciate you as an angler and YouTuber. Have you any advice for a young fisherman on how to fish from a river? Love from Ireland.
Thanks very much, Shane. I appreciate that. If you've, what kind of rivers are you fishing from, Shane? If you could just jot that down in the comments there, I'll have a wee think on that. But if you're just starting out, you've obviously got some gear, and I would always suggest that for the river fishing, you're best to have two rods, and the reason for that is you can set up two different setups. So you can fish dry fly or you can fish nymphs, and the dry fly rod doubles as a dual rod come indicator, whatever way you want to fish the river. But I've not fished rivers out in Ireland. I have fished some of the small still waters, but that's a long story that I'll not get into on this. Thanks for the question.
From Chris McCafferty. Evening, Lindsay. Finally made it home to Scotland for a bit of fishing. The question is, fluorocarbon or copolymer for still water dries?
Cheers, Chris. I'm glad you finally got over. I know that you were a wee bit worried it was going to take a while, but you've managed to make it. So, fluorocarbon and copolymer, it's the eternal argument. You always get people on Facebook arguing black's white about this subject. Now, personally, and it is a personal opinion, I just use fluorocarbon. There's only very, very rare occasions where I'll switch to copolymer, and that's generally if there's a big chop on and I want to keep my flies right in the surface. So with the chop and the fluorocarbon combination, it tends to drag your flies under a little bit. So I'll often switch to monofilament or copolymer, and that just keeps them riding nice and high. Of course, you've got to remember to degreasing the tippet material is much more important when you're fishing with copolymer and mono, whereas fluorocarbon you can get away with it a little bit more, unless it's a flat cam and the tippet is being held in the surface tension, and then you need to degrease that as well just to get the tippet to sink under. I hope that answers your question, Chris, and I hope you're getting plenty of fishing in, pal.
Next one is from Robert Ross Google. Hi Lindsay, hope you're well. My question is, what medium fast action rod would you recommend?
What's your budget, buddy? Yeah, obviously you're going to have to type what you. If you don't want to type your budget, I think I can answer that kind of in two ways. If your budget's sort of I'm minted, I can buy what I like. You could have a look at some of the Orvis medium fast rods. If you're on a budget, I would say you could do much worse than the Witchwood RS2. I'm currently using that. Now, I'm a big fan of fast action rods from my competition days, so you know, fast action rods were a great thing for getting fish in, fighting them fast and getting them in. But as you get older, you want to enjoy it more, and to do that you need a more medium action rod. It protects your shoulder, it's easier on your wrist. So the RS2 is quite a nice rod. It bends through middle to tip, and it's a very reasonable price.
About £200?
Yeah, well that's well within your budget, I think. But what I would always suggest is, please don't just take my word for this. You've got to really find a distributor. I think if you're in Scotland, I think Glasgow Angling do Witchwood. Go along and try the rod. Don't, you know, you can read as many reviews as you like. You might pick it up and go, I don't like it. Oh, I wished I'd never bought this. So I would always say to people, I'm happy to recommend, but please do try this stuff for yourself, or you might end up having one of them COVID purchases where you bought something because somebody said it was great on the internet and you've had to send it back. I hope that answers your question, Pat.
Next question is from Josh Outram. Would you talk through some of your go-to patterns of different flies? I am slowly but surely putting together a still water box and would love to know what you'd pick for yours.
Josh, small water, still water patterns and large water patterns, I have sort of two different schools of thought on it. So for the large still waters fishing from a boat, I'll give you my top 5, and I'm talking about flies to catch fish, not flies for fly tying, which I'm a great believer in fly tying as a separate hobby from fly fishing. So let's talk about catching fish. My number one fly that I would not get in a boat without is a candy floss booby. I just wouldn't even contemplate leaving home without that fly, because it's adaptable in so many different scenarios on the still waters from a boat. The other one, so in that order, is a blob. I would have an orange blob all day in my box, and I'd have an orange fab. A fab's a foam-arsed version of that. I've got them on the channel if you want to see how they're tied. So that would be my top 3, and then I would always like a couple of nymphs in the box as well. So I would take a cruncher and I would take a dial back. Now, obviously I've given you my top 5, I've not mentioned any dry flies. It's very, very rare match fishing that you'll get a chance to fish dries. It does happen occasionally, I'm not going to say it never happens, but it's a very rare occasion. So if I could only take 5 flies on the water in various sizes, they would do me. Now for a still water, I would include a small still water I'm talking about now. I would include a humongous amongst that, because that picks fish up in every still water I've ever fished. When things are going a wee bit wrong, put the shuggy on and it always does a job for me. I hope that kind of answers your question, pal.
Next one is from Michael Shaw. Mick, I think, do you have examples of light bulb moments that have shaped your perspective and development of your fishing career?
Hello, Mick. Oh, I'm glad you've come on. I remember asking you to cut the grey out my hair at Euston about 30 years ago, and well, there'd be no hair left if I let you run free with it now. Light bulb moments. Oh, let me have a think. I have got one, and this is a true story. I'm on Rutland, and it was the Orvis Pairs competition. So it's some 25, 26 years ago. I don't know how long ago they stopped running that competition. But I was fishing. My partner was Graham Sharp, and you get in a boat with another guy, and I want to say Stuart Hooney, but I'm not sure I've got the name right. But he does run fly only as the shop that he went on to run. But we were fishing together, and it was a horrific day. The wind was howling. There was hardly any boats in the basin because the wind was so bad. So we did a tour of the North Arm, and we did a tour of the South Arm, and we caught very little fish. I spent half my time untangling a 4-fly cast, and I got fed up, to be perfectly honest, which I never do in a match. Generally I fish hard till the end. And what happened was, Stuart pointed out, and I think it is Stuart, there's a couple of boats just keep re-drifting up by Normanton Church and Three Trees. Let's go over there and we'll see what they're doing. I said, okay. Well, if we're going to do that, I'm going to go down to 1 fly. I'm going to stick on a candy floss booby, and I'm just going to fish with a 10-foot leader. At least I'll be fishing. And nobody was catching any fish. I mean, it was horrific. It really was bad. Anyway, we got down into the basin, and I've got my DI7 on, and I've thrown out this single fly thinking, oh well, at least I'm fishing 1 fly effectively. And long story short, I ended up with needing a new DI7 because I propped it, but luckily I had another one on the reel and pulled it straight through, and I was fishing again. But I finished with 8 fish, and that was the bag limit at the time, and I'd done really well. And I'd done that in about an hour and a half, and I came away thinking, what all that effort fishing a 4-fly cast, yet I've gone out with a single fly, I've fished it effectively, and I've caught more fish. So I would say that was a light bulb moment. You don't have to go out with a 24-foot leader with your flies 5 foot apart and 4 flies. You can catch just as many fish with 1 fly, and that was reinforced to me later on in life when I was fishing at Grapham in the Peregrines, and in practice I'd been slaying them on this little hare's ear type pattern, and had a big team of flies, and I've got in the boat with a guy, and he, I had like 16 bags and 9 rods and all the usual match fishing nonsense. This boy got in the boat with a lunch bag and a plastic bag, and he set up his tackle, he put on 10 foot of tippet, and he tied on an ace of spades, and he turned me inside out that day, and I was thinking, wow, there you go. Evidence again that sometimes we just overthink things, and the simple way is the best way. So that would be the light bulb moment, if you like, Mick. I hope that answers your question, pal, and that you're keeping well.
So Reese Fisher says, evening mate, how much is your wife charging you to be the question master?
Cheers, Reese. I'm planning with vodka, mate. It's the easy way.
Next one is from Mario Gentilomo. Hi Lindsay, when are you going to come over to visit our club in Italy? The marble trout are waiting for you in the Alps. All the best.
Jane, do you need the toilet though? I would love to come over. You must send me details in a private message sometime in the very near future. No, I'd love to come over. I've not fished so much in Italy, but I've fished an awful lot in Slovenia and I absolutely love it. I think the marble trout's an amazing species, and I'm sure if you're in northern Italy, you'll have fished it quite a bit yourself, because the times I have fished it, I'm always bumping into Italian anglers, and we always, they've always got wine and cheese. So hey, love yous guys. I'll come over anytime the invite's there. Thanks for the question.
Next one's Gary Burns. Hi Lindsay, I hope you're well. Have you ever fished Loch Leven, and if so, what did you catch on?
Oh, that's a cracker. You know what? I'm going to tell you the story because you've asked. I've only ever fished it once, and I fished it with my pal Ronnie Christie, and it was 30 years ago, and we fished it very, very early season, and we turned up to Loch Leven, and the boats are amazing, aren't they? Big, massive clink boats. You'd feel safe in the North Sea in them boats, and what a beautiful place as well. And I'm from Dunfermline originally, so Loch Leven was literally on my doorstep. And Ronnie'd come over from Edinburgh, and we'd gone to Loch Leven for the day. And we started off, it was I think it was April, it might have been May actually, but it was a beautiful day, absolutely stunning. So I peeled off all the waterproofs and the jerseys and that, and we've got in the boat, and Ronnie's driving, and the next thing, the cloud comes over, then the wind comes, and then it felt like the North Sea. And then shortly after that, we had like the snowstorm, and then by 3 o'clock, Ronnie had to beach the boat, get me off the boat because I was a gibbering wreck, run up and down the bank trying to get the blood pumping, and we got back in the boat. And we'd been fishing for 6 hours and not a fish in the boat. So I'm fishing away, and Ronnie's a much better angler than I ever will be, and we've got nothing. And I was fishing with this beady-eyed cat, and I got one. By some miracle, I got one, and I got it in the boat. And I think it was the first time in like 5 years I'd ever beat Ronnie. So that was my experience of Loch Leven. Hypothermia, one fish, 4 seasons in a day. But what a great place. I hope to get back there one day soon. Thanks very much for your question, pal.
Lee Mower says, hi Lindsay, and then Big Davy Fraser asks, hi Lindsay, of all the fly lines, what is your most used?
Davey, that's a grand question, pal, and if you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I'd have said without reserve a DI7. That, it's what I used because I'd go on to these competitions, and generally the way to get the fish would be to stick on a couple of globs, hoy your DI7 as far as you can, count it down to the required depth, and then just pull back. But as I've moved on in years, I would say without doubt I probably go through a floater a year now. I love fishing a floating line. It can be just as effective. I know a lot of the midge tip lines have come into their own, and I'm a big fan of them as well, but there's something special about fishing a floater. It doesn't tax your shoulder so much. The takes are very visible, and it's just great fun to use. So I would say a floating line. Thanks very much, Davey.
So Chris Thomas asks, always wondered if there is a use for pigeon feathers, as the breast feathers are soft and subtle pink. Wing and tail seems flexible and white and grey and black in zones on the tails. Any thoughts?
I've never used pigeon, to be honest, in my fly tying. I've had some in a pie once mixed in with mince and it was really tasty, but fly tying, sorry, I can't help you on the pigeon feather front. I bet they're quite easy to come by though. You know, we've got wood pigeons in our garden that are always nagging at the bird feeders, so it might be something I'll have a wee try over the close season. Sorry I can't help you, but thanks very much for the question.
So TopCat77, is there any cheap river fishing in the Surrey area that you would recommend?
Top Cat, how prepared are you to break the law? That's what I would say to you. The river fishing is pretty much sewn up in the south of England. There are some areas that you can go and fish legally and free, and the rivers are the Itchen and the Lambourne are the two that come to mind. Now there's a really good bit of the Lambourne in Newbury. The only thing I would say is it does flow through like a children's play park and some residential areas, and I think the fish are quite highly pressured. But what I would say, if you want to improve your angling, it's a great place to go and do that, because these fish, I've seen it all. The Lambourne, I've not been for a few years actually, and that's prompted me to maybe give it a go over the winter for the grayling. The place at the Itchen I've not actually fished myself, but my friends tell me that there's good parking at a pub nearby, and you've got about 200 to 300 yards of water that you can fish. It's not going to keep you busy all day, but it will give you a morning or an afternoon sport, and the price is right. You know, as long as you've got an EA rod licence, you can crack on and fish that. I hope that answers your question, pal.
Next one from Joe Paulo Furman. Congratulations on your channel. I'm your fan. I live in Brazil. I get inspired by the baits of friends from abroad to make my baits. And then there's a question from Jorge Luis Corbalan. Hi Lindsay, when will you come to Argentine, Patagonia to fish?
Jane, do you need the toilet?
Lots of invitations.
I would love to come to Argentina. I've seen some amazing videos of the fishing that you've got out there in Patagonia, but I'm a simple civil servant. I don't think, even when I get my big super duper payout when I finish working at the end of my working life, that I'll be able to stretch to fly to Patagonia. But never say never. I'll just keep watching the videos, and it is on my bucket list, but it's pretty far down there as regards to achievability, is what I would say. But I would love to do it. It looks amazing, absolutely amazing. You're very lucky to have that fishing. Thanks very much for the question.
Next question is John Allen. Good evening. Have you ever tried fishing for mullet? And if so, what flies would you prefer to use?
Right, John, you know what? I've never fished saltwater in this country. I've fished in America, I've fished the Everglades, and I've fished in the Florida Keys in the salt, but I've never managed to get out in this country now. A few of my friends, and including Reese, if Reese is still on, I know they do quite a bit of the mullet and the bass fishing and all that sort of stuff, and it's something that I keep meaning to get into, but I'm still pretty much in love with the River Avon and Rutland and Gratham, you know, the still waters, and when I do get a chance to go fishing, I want to go and do that sort of kind of fishing. But maybe one day I probably need to go with a friend that knows what they're doing, and perhaps I'll catch a mullet. But I believe they are really, really tricky. I know one of my pals, Tim Joyce, he's a professional guide, and in his free time he goes chasing the mullet, and he said it can be a frustrating old affair. So I've not been brave enough to give it a go yet, but when I do, I'll find out what the best flies are, and I'll try and do some tutorials on the channel. Thanks for the question.
So we're just going to go back to some of the questions that were on the community page. So Nigel Detch, what is your first choice river dry fly when nothing is hatching?
Oh, sorry. I would always go with a sedge, Nigel. I would always put a sedge on. If nothing's hatching, generally I would fish dual. I wouldn't just fish a dry fly. You know, I'm not a glutton for punishment. If I don't see signs of a good hatch on or fish rising, I'll fish a nymph under the dry, or I will go straight to nymphs. I won't mess about. I know a lot of people say it's not about catching fish, and I get that. You know, it's not always about catching fish. You've got to enjoy the environment you're in, but you know, it's called fishing for a reason. You know, you want to catch fish as well, don't you? And so I don't muck about. No hatch on them on the nymphs. I hope that answers your question, Nigel.
And the next one from Bry Ricardo. When you are fishing slow in a shallow still water, say 3 to 4 foot, how do you keep your flies in the first foot or so that they don't get caught in weed?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Sure. When you're fishing slow in a shallow still water, say 3 to 4 foot deep, how do you keep your flies in the first foot or so it doesn't get caught in weeds?
Ricardo, I would use buoyant patterns like popper fry, daddy longlegs, or even boobies. That will keep your fly up if you're fishing it on a floating line. You know, it will stay up in the surface film, and in 3 or 4 feet of water, fish are seeing your fly. Make no mistake. You know, even if they're right on the bottom of that, they are seeing your fly. And often in the shallow stuff, the disturbance of a pattern like a booby will cause fish to come and investigate, and it can be amazing fishing, especially here in the UK. You know, up at Rutland, when you're dragging your fly off the weed beds and you get a massive bow wave towards your fly. It's really exciting, and it's a great way to fish. But that's how I would do it. And obviously the speed of retrieve is going to keep your fly up as well. You know, if you don't want to use a buoyant pattern, you just need to speed up, and that will keep your fly high in the water. I hope that answers your question, pal.
So John Allen says, thank you for the reply about the mullet question, but he also left a question on the community page which says, thinking about leaders and leader diameters, what diameter is needed for what fishing situation?
We're talking about rivers or still waters?
Do one of each.
Well, still waters, so the small still waters, I find that I can get away with using 4-pound tippet. Now, some still waters would frown upon that because they stock fish between 6 and to double figure fish, and using 4-pound tippet would be irresponsible. You know, what you're likely to do is snap off in the fish, and you don't ever want to leave a hook in a fish. But what I would say, my counter argument to that, if you're experienced, and I've got a lot of experience, is you know how to play a fish on light tippet, and you've got to be using the correct action rod. You know, a fast action rod, 4-pound tippet, is a recipe for disaster. So I would never do that. But on the small still waters, I would go down to 4-pound tippet, and it does up your success game. I'll always start on 8-pound, 8.5-pound tippet, but if I'm not getting takes, the first thing I'll do is change my tippet diameter, and that can often make a difference. Now, it's not because I think the fish see the tippet. I think it's because the fly moves slightly different on the lighter tippet, and that's why I do it. Now, on a river, again, same action. My river fly rods are extremely soft actioned, especially my nymphing rods. I use a Hanak Superb 10 foot for a 3, and the tip is so soft, and I can get away with using down to 0.08, which is very, very thin tip. It's less than a pound, but I've landed fish to 2.5 pound on that kind of tippet with that rod. And likewise for the dry fly, I use an XL drift, a Witchwood XL drift, and I can get away with sort of 0.12 on the rivers, fishing dry fly with that. So it really does depend on the situation. a lot of the questions that I get, that they're just not specific enough to give a short answer. You know, some of these things I can talk about all evening, but I just don't have that time. But I hope that gives you a little insight into my thought process.
So Andy Hunt asks, for river fishing, do you prefer double taper or weight forward? Andy likes double taper because he thinks he's a tight Yorkshireman.
Yep, and I'm a tight Scotsman. I prefer double taper as well in the river. I wouldn't have a double taper rod on a still water situation, but for the river, I always use double taper lines. And like yourself, once you've used up one half, you can always change the line round and get double value. And I'm all about the value, Andy, you know. I hope that answers your question, Paul.
So you've got a cheeky little comment. What is water? Do you mean water?
Is that Steve Cullen?
No, it's David Willisey. And
Water?
Gary Bones has come back and says, yes, Lochleven can be...
That's water.
Lochleven can be brutal, Lindsay. I'm also from Fife, Kinglassy. Are you planning any more joint videos with Reese Fishers, as your last outing was a great watch?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I've been in contact with Reese recently. He's been really busy with a job. You know, he's got a real job. I'm in the civil service. It's like a real job, but not really. But yeah, me and Reese, we're going to do a video, and I don't want to say too much, but I'll be visiting Wales in the near future to a venue I've always wanted to go to, and I think Reese knows it very well. Hopefully he's going to show me the ropes, and we'll get in about some sport, and we'll be able to do a similar video to what we did at Ibrook, only I'll be picking this time. Bloody fab. Yeah, me and Reese had a great day out. It was great fun, and I'll look forward to the next time we hit the water together. Thanks for the question, pal.
So Andrew Langley asks, when you have no fishing info available for a new still water, what's your starting setup?
Right. That's a good question. And again, it would obviously depend a lot on the circumstances. So, and what I mean by that is the weather conditions, and there's never an occasion I've come across where there's no information. When I've turned up at a fishery that I don't know well, the first thing I'll do is ask the guy that's taking my money, where's the best place to start? You know, what's the good pegs on the fishery? The owner or the fishery manager will certainly know that information, and I've not met one yet that doesn't want his punters to go and catch some fish. You know, that's the name of the game. So the information is always there. There'll be anglers around the water. If it's a half decent fishery, there'll always be anglers around the water. I think maybe twice in my life I've turned up to a fishery where there's not been anyone fishing, and I've thought, maybe I'm in the wrong fishery here. But you know, it's very, very rarely you'll be shunned by a fellow angler. You know, if you turn up at a fishery, see a guy catch a fish, you walk up, more than likely he'll say, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and oh, by the way, here's the fly, go and give it a go, pal. And you know, I've even known guys that have been catching fish to say, oh look, come in here, I've had 2 or 3, I'm just going to have a walk around and try elsewhere. So there's always information available. You've just got to ask, you know, don't be shy, getting about the people. Now, if I did turn up at a fishery and the guy that was taking the money's not there yet and there was no anglers, I would always start on the lee shore. So the shore the wind's been blowing into for the last day or so, and always check the weather before I go, because what will be happening is the wind will be pushing the food down onto that bank. And what you find with small still waters anyway, and large waters for that matter, the fish will be sitting in the margins, and you don't have to cast very far, and you'll often get sport there. But them fisheries that aren't well attended, i.e. with no manager, no anglers round it, there might not be that many fish in it. So you've just got to be wary of that. I hope that answers the question, Paul.
We've got another question from TopCat77. Who would you recommend as a casting instructor for large still waters like Rutland? As casting from a boat, I believe, is very different from casting from the bank.
That's a great question actually, because I don't know anybody that teaches casting instruction from a boat. Now, I was very lucky. Many years ago, my wife bought me a session with Peter Cockwell when he had his shop at the Albury Estates, and he took me to a small Stillwater and showed me how to cast. And 3 years later, I've forgotten about that, and I'm still shite at casting. But you know, you always learn to cast from instructors on the grass or stood up, and it's a great point. But you should learn. I think it's quite important to learn good technique from the bank. Now, what you do when you get in the boat is you just transfer that skill. Now, if you wanted to improve your casting from a boat, I would suggest you get a guide. I know Tim Joyce does a lot of work from boats. Steve Cullen does a lot of work from boats. Any of them guys have got enough experience as to put you right where you're going wrong casting from a boat. It's very different though, because the technique you're taught properly is absolutely no good to you in a boat, especially if you're on the engine side and you've got a boat partner in the point. Now, unless your boat partner's wearing a crash helmet, you don't want to be doing all this flicking 1 to 2. I mean, in the army team, they used to call me the straight arm of death, because I'd be like this casting, because I didn't want to hit my boat partner. And I think it's important. You can ruin his day. I've been hooked in the ear myself. I've been hooked in the face. I've had my sunglasses ripped from my face. At one point, Alan Ward, I'm not going to mention any name. Oh, too late. You still owe me a pair of bowlies, Alan. Yeah, so it's very different fishing from a boat than it is fishing from the bank. So it may be worth your while, if you're worried about it, or even if you're a member of a club, get out with an experienced angler that will help put you on the right road. I hope that helps, pal.
So Gary Burns says, thanks for the replies about Lochleven and for taking the time to share your knowledge. We've got another question from David Willisey. Why do game anglers not try coarse anglers nylon such as Reflow Powerline? It's half the price and as good as any specialised game tippets I've used.
No, actually, I think you're right. I don't know if it's a snobbish thing. I've certainly not got that hindrance. I've used lots of different coarse fishing tippets, and some of them are really good. I've used Guru on the rivers. It's fantastic. Drennan, really good stuff. Why do other anglers not use it? I can't speak for them really, but a lot of the time I think when anglers go into the tackle shops, the fly fishing tackle shops next to the fly fishing lake, the tippet that's on the shelves just happens to be the fly fishing branded ones. I mean, to be honest with you, the price of tippet is absolutely shocking now. I used to, when I competed, I used to use Rio Fluoroflex Plus in 8.5 pounds, and I used it because, in my opinion, it was the best. But now I think it's over £20 for it. In fact, somebody said to me £30 for a spool, a tippet. Really? I can't justify that, I'm afraid. So I think anglers that are looking to save a little bit of money, by the way, tippet and hooks are not the thing to make your savings on. But looking at the coarse fishing tippet materials might be well worth a look at. And it's a confidence thing, you know. Anglers will not use something they're not confident with. Many years ago, I decided to change over to Ravage. This is 25 years ago, so. And it cost me several fish by being snapped up, and that was me fishing £9. So I kind of lost confidence in it. I went back to Rio, and then I was with Rio for a long time. Now, because I'm not competing at such higher level, I just use what I'm given, which would have fluorocarbon. It's not quite as thin a diameter as I would like to see, but the price is right. So I hope that answers your question, buddy.
So TopCat77 says, Kitch caught me in the ear my first time in a boat with a B175 on a DI7, and then it goes on to ask.
Did he cut it out with a filleting knife?
So Top Gat goes on to ask, have you ever been bone fishing? Where did you go and how did you enjoy it?
I haven't been bone fishing. I went to we went to the Florida Keys. It was a sort of split holiday, if you like. My wife went to Miami. I went to the Florida Keys. No, that's not what happened. We both went to Miami. It was like we had to have target fish, donut shot to donut shot. But yeah, don't go to Miami, the murder capital of the world. But that said, I did get a day guided fishing in the Everglades. Now I didn't get a chance to fish for bonefish, but I fished for something called redfish. They've got a spot on the tail, and that was phenomenal with a fly rod. And it was funny because we also, I can't remember the name of the species, but I took my own travel kit with me to Florida, and I got in the boat and I said, well, do you mind if I use my rod and reel? And he said, what have you got? I said, well, I've got a hardy smuggler for a 7. And he sort of smiled. He said, yeah, you know, put it up, stick this fly on, and I got this sort of saltwater type fly. And the first fish I caught spooled me and snapped me. He said, right, put that away, and he gave me a 10 weight, and I went on to have a pretty good day actually. But no, not been bone fishing, and a lot of my pals have and said it's phenomenal. I don't know how many times I've been in. Do you need the toilet? No. I don't know how many times I've been invited to go bone fishing, but yeah, one of them days I'm going to take that up and just see what it's like. But thanks for the question.
We nearly caught a crocodile in the Everglades as well, didn't we?
Oh yeah. Yeah, don't put your hand in the water in the Everglades when you're fishing. Top tip.
So that's all the questions we've had on the community board and the chat. So I was going to ask you one. What's been your, have you got a particular favourite day out fishing, and why was it your favourite?
Have you subscribed?
I am subscribed.
Particular favourite day out fishing? I've had many, but amongst the most memorable would be a day I had on the River Socha the last time I went to Slovenia. So that would have been about 4 years ago, and I'd been to Slovenia 5 times prior to that and failed to catch a marble trout. All my friends had caught marble trout. Del Spry, who had gone with us on that trip, was there 15 minutes and caught a marble trout. So I was feeling a bit down in the dumps, to say the least, and me and Graham Sharp, we wandered upstream onto the main carrier of the Socha because we were fishing a tributary, and we walked up onto the main river, and I could see this fish rising amongst the rocks, and I must have changed flies 4 or 5 times, and eventually hooked this fish, and it was a marble trout. And so I've got it. I don't know how many of you know the Socha. It's a very powerful river. But then when I looked, I'd left my landing net on the other side of the river, and bless his soul, Sharpie ran over the net, and I managed to get the prize, you know, the marble trout. So I'll never forget that, and I always remember after I'd taken a couple of photos and safely released it, I sat down, I stopped fishing for about half an hour, and I was just taking in the view. And I took a photograph of Graham fishing, and it's still one of my favourite images that I often look at. Just an amazing day. The other day, going to a still water perspective, was fished for England at Rutland. I think it was my 2nd cap, and the week leading up to the competition was absolutely horrific. It was just awful. The weather was terrible. I think I blanked 3 out of the 4 days practice, and on the 4th day I think I managed 1 fish. In fact, it was so bad that on the last practice day, the manager, Graham Watson at his time, he took me out fishing just to make sure my head wasn't gone, because I had nothing to contribute. I'd just been blanking my tits off. But on the match day, conditions changed completely, and I drew the Scottish national champion at the time, who was Paul Sharp, and you know, we got on the pontoon and we did the international dance, which means can I have the engine? No, you can't have the engine. Go on. No, we'll flip for it. we went back and forth, and then eventually Paul said, oh, David Murray's a good friend of mine, he says you know what you're doing, you take the engine. And so I got in the boat, and Phil Dixon and Cy Gaines had come up with a method that I still call it the method, which was a booby on the point, not very far away, a really heavy size 8 grub hook buzzer, and then a couple of dial backs up. And so that was Team England's method, if you like, for winning that international. So we went out on the day, and I went out on the method. And so if you can imagine, I don't know how well you know Rutland, but I started at the boys fishing past the rocks at Fantasy Island where the water tower is, and I managed to get a fish early, which settled my nerves. I've got to be honest, I was quite nervous, having not done very well in practice. I got one, and then I lost one, and then I got another one. So this is only like, I don't know, 40 minutes into the match. So I've got 2 fish in the boat. I think, oh, I'm doing okay here. And then the boatman I had was Vince Brooks, and I'd fished with Vince many times. A phenomenal angler for Buell, and a great guy. I think his son Sean fishes for England now. But Vince Brooks, top rod, great guy. He said, oh, you're doing all right, Lindsay, you know. And the reason I was doing all right is because I was on the inside line. So I was on the engine, Paul was fishing out. And what the good thing was, Paul was getting plenty of sport, but they just weren't sticking. He just couldn't get them to stick. So he was happy that we were in amongst fish, which is good, because when you're competing, the last thing you want to be doing is getting dragged away to some other place that you're not content with. And I knew that I would be able to catch fish at Fantasy. So we're fishing away, and about an hour in, so I've gone like 15 minutes without a take, and I said to Vince, I'm going to change. He goes, you're going to change? Are you mad? I said, no, this isn't right. I said, I'm going to go to the bung. And he went, I think you're off your head. So I put the bung on. 5 minutes later, I was like, you're right, Vince. And I changed back, and I caught another fish. And as we were going back round for the drift, I had this nagging doubt in my mind that I was still on the wrong method. So while we were motoring round, I went back to the bung, and Vince was pulling his hair out, going, what are you doing? But it was absolutely the right decision. And I went on to catch, I think I had 9 fish in the boat, and I lost 3 fish at the net, and numerous other fish on and off, and it was just a fantastic day's sport, and I really enjoyed it. Paul ended up with 3 or 4 fish. We had a wee drama in the bar that night. He cried on my shoulder for a wee while, but I'm sure he's over that now. But they're the most memorable days I've had, I've got to say.
So Lee Mowers has just let you know that the redfish you mentioned in the Everglades, they're called red drum, which are carp on steroids. And then another question from David Willisey. Which guides would you recommend for teaching lure techniques on the big reservoirs?
Guides?
Which guides would you recommend for teaching lure techniques on the big reservoirs?
I take it you mean the angling water ones. So I would say the guys I've fished with that I know are particularly good are Tim Joyce and Steve Cullen are phenomenal anglers. Whether it's fishing big lures or if you want to learn to fish dry flies, these guys will definitely square you away and improve you. I've got to say they're both very, very good anglers, and they're good at explaining what they're doing, which is key. If you're gonna guide, you've got to be able to get that knowledge across. There's many times, and this goes back to my days in the army, and there was a couple of guys, in fact a lot of the guys that are sitting watching this will know who Wayne Jones is. They might not know a guy called Charlie Will, but these guys were, and I'd sit in a boat with these blokes, and they were absolutely on a different level. I mean, it was like Premier League, Sunday League. That was the difference. And I would turn to Wayne and say, how are you doing that? And back then, he was only a young lad. I think he was just out of the Welsh junior team. He was just not long in the army, and he was just new to the sort of soldier palmer setup. But he could catch fish in a bucket, that boy, but he couldn't explain how he was doing it, and that was always very frustrating to me. And Charlie Will was another guy, you know, a tutor. He was in the Highlanders, I think, when he was serving, but Charlie was just one of these naturally gifted anglers that he knew. So, and here's an example one of my pals used. Charlie would be fishing a booby and he goes, that's not right. And instead of changing the fly, he'd bite a little bit off the booby eye to get it to sink a little bit quicker, or just a little nuance. And I go, what are you doing? He goes, oh, well, this will fish better. Well, why? But he couldn't explain, well, because somewhere in the back of his head, he knows the fly's going to fish at a different level and he's going to catch fish. And invariably, you know, Charlie Will would catch fish in a bucket as well. Him and Wayne would be in the same bucket catching fish. But yeah, phenomenal anglers, and that's a great thing. But going back to the guide, you can be as great as you like, but if you can't put it across to the client, then you're not a very good guide. So yeah, Tim Joyce, Steve Cullen, either of them would be worth a bash if you're looking for a day out in the Midlands waters.
So John Crowley asks, what lines do you fish with? Do you have a particular make? Cheers, pal.
I take it we're talking about still water lines. I've got a variety of different lines, so I use a lot of the Witchwood lines. The vast amount of my lines are Airflow. Without doubt, Airflow make the best sinking fly lines on the market. And you know, I don't care if somebody comes on and says, well, Rio this and you know all the rest of it. No, Airflow are the market leaders in sinking lines. They've been ahead of the game for decades, and I love using their sinking lines. But I also have Rio lines, some of the midge tips, the old midge tips. I mean, I used to have a Rio Perception floater and I loved that line, and when I wore it out I went to buy another one and I found out that it was over 100 quid. So guess what, I didn't bother. I can't be spending 100 quid on a fly line. That's just ridiculous. And my wife just backed me up on that point. Okay, I hope that answers your question. I mean, I think I've got currently around 45 lines. I know it might seem excessive, but it covers every eventuality, especially if you're fishing for a boat in different depths of water. Right, folks, I think we're getting near the hour, so if there's any last minuters, please throw them at me now.
I've got two. Top Cat 77. What's your best memory in a lock style competition?
Oh, I think are you watching Top Cat? I just said that.
Oh, maybe he posted it as you were saying it. Okay, so Nigel Detch says, when are you coming up to Derbyshire for a session?
Nigel, I promise you I'll be up next year. How's that?
So Lee Murray says, great explanation on what makes a good guide. I agree. The guide's job is to get me to catch fish. And then Pro Skipper 1 says, hi, I'm new to this site, based in Plymouth, thinking of using a switch rod for sea fishing. What sort of line do you recommend? Shakespeare Odyssey 10'6".
I'm sorry, I've not got any experience of sea fishing in this country, so I couldn't hand on heart give you a recommendation. But did you say 10 weight, was it?
Shakespeare Odyssey 10'6".
What was the weight?
Thinking of using a switch rod. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, is the honest answer. I could probably find out because I know quite a few boys that do it, but I couldn't hand on heart tell you what the best line would be.
And that's all the questions.
Okay, folks. Well, thanks very much. It's been an amazingly quick hour, and thanks so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the questions or you think I've got something wrong, please leave it in the comments section. What I'm going to do now is once the live stream's finished, the video will go offline and I will upload a better quality version because I can only stream at a certain quality, which will be indexed with your questions. So thanks again, take care, enjoy a dram,